"21 days later, and those new blood samples had higher DNA tests, and then they were capable of being RFLP tested." Framing for this whole section of the conversation was you asking me why would I disagree with those blood samples as good evidence for OJ Simpson?
They can't explain it, so it was planted. If we can even remotely make the jury think this is true.
Early this year, in which the jurors all got together and explained why they themselves found OJ Simpson to be innocent. I mean, it should be evident to most people that if you go back to the 90s, right, and you have this black man like supposedly killing this white woman, that it seems really weird that the peers would suddenly come together and just be like, nah, you know what, we're just gonna go ahead and find OJ innocent for no reason, right? Like, I mean, one of the things that we always complain about is like how much the criminal justice system works against us, yet in this scenario, some sort of way it worked for him. And he would obviously be an outlier, so then I would wonder what that is. I'll say this finally. My mother was very much like invested in the OJ Simpson thing. She had read Johnny Cochran's book, and so she had kind of preached to us that OJ Simpson was innocent. I, obviously just respect my mother, so I kind of just had that belief to begin with. But as I got older, I decided I better go and actually look this up myself, and I did. And upon doing so, I came to the realization that there was literally no good evidence that OJ Simpson was guilty. I heard, I remembered some of the things that my mother had said, and then of course just seeing it for myself, I was like, oh yeah, this is obvious. And then when I started engaging in conversations with people about it, I noticed that almost no one knew the basic things that like the defense had like raised, against the prosecution that made the jury believe that he wasn't guilty. And so it was like, well, if you don't know these things, then yeah, and I know how much the smear campaign has been to paint him as guilty. So yeah, I just feel pretty confident that there's no good evidence.
Yeah, great opening. I want to first say I have absolute respect to the first couple of sentences you said, where you said supposedly killed the white woman. I think just to give you some props, I think a lot of times I end up in debates with people who, I mean, believe it or not, I don't believe they believe their position, but they just like to be argumentative. So by that little word there tells me you do, and that's powerful stuff. So I want to give you a little shout out there.
Appreciate that.
You asked, yeah, of course, you asked the catalyst, and I get it. It's a great point to make about why, and just to kind of give you where we'll go into, I'm sure, throughout this conversation. But I think the catalyst is pretty clear. It was Rodney King. So I think there was a catalyst that did cause something, and I want to tie that into an idea, not necessarily to debate it, but just to kind of plant the idea in your mind that I think the word justice is subjective. When we say we go for justice in the justice system, I think justice means different things to different people. And I would argue it's not just plausible, but it's proven that justice for most of these jurors was letting OJ off the hook. That was justice to them. And I also want to make a human argument here. Hard to disagree with that. So I want to paint that picture, but again, we're not debating morality here. We're debating, is there enough evidence to prove his guilt? With that said, I want one final point. You said that you find a lot of people you talk to about this aren't informed, they don't know about it. I would absolutely agree, especially in the 90s. Now, you moved into the story about, you researched, you read into it. I would argue so did everyone else. I have a chart that I kind of brought. I don't know if you want me to show you this stuff, or you can take my word for it until you don't, and then I'm happy to provide it to you. But I have a chart here that basically shows the changing opinions of the Simpson case over the years by race.
That's so beautiful. I wanted to bring that up later, but that's great. Yes, we can go into that for sure.
Okay. Well, I guess my point to citing it is it just kind of proves your point that, yeah, over time, people who would have had maybe an infallible reason to have a judgment on the OJ case, over time, as information became more available, more accessible, the internet, Wikipedia, etc., as that happened, those people began to find more of the truth. So the white people started to find more. Let me read the chart to you. So 1995, white guilty goes up, black not guilty goes down. Black guilty goes up, white guilty goes down. So I just think people kind of moved more into a logical position as opposed to an emotional one over time, which kind of goes back to the catalyst being Rodney King. We have attention spans of 2 days. So, out of sight, out of mind, if you will. Yeah.
Okay, well wow. I'm glad that we're bringing this point up, but I think that it speaks more to a different problem. And I think the problem is that the media literally intentionally misconstrued and misrepresented what actually happened within that OJ case. And I think that it's not a matter of people getting access to more information, because if you actually engage with any of those people, you'll find that they're not actually informed about the trial. But we've had like obviously the People versus OJ Simpson, in which they like did so much editorializing and they did a bunch of nonsense that wasn't actually valid, that was literally completely not true whatsoever, and then they put that into that thing. And of course, because it's coming off like it's a documentary, almost as if it's like supposed to be some form of like they're supposed to be particularly informative, and it's the exact opposite. It's literally misleading. For example, one of the things that they talk about in the People versus OJ Simpson was that the reason that the glove didn't fit was because OJ Simpson had a specific form of arthritis, and his lawyers told him specifically not to take that medication on the day that they knew he would be tested, so that way that by him doing that, but by them doing that, then the glove wouldn't fit, and so then because of that, then OJ, it would be like a slam dunk, right? But of course, that's not true whatsoever, because both the prosecution and the defense admitted that neither of them knew that he was going to try on that glove. The prosecution, Darden, said that it was kind of like a spur of the moment thing that he just decided to do, and that he regretted. There was no, like, he had no inclination to do that beforehand, neither the defense nor the prosecution. The defense specifically said they were completely surprised when he did that, because they felt like it was actually a blunder as well, because up to that point, they didn't know that the glove wouldn't fit. All they knew was up to that point that there was a glove, and that the glove had blood on it, like, and that supposedly it was OJ's, and all of those things. So the idea that now you guys can add in this inclination that they knew it was going to be tried, something that they didn't know, and that they intentionally told him not to take his medication so his hand would swell, like, it just, all of it just sounds like it. It is literally a fabrication. But if someone watches that documentary, if someone watches that piece of information, and they believe that it's mostly accurate, and I can show you article after article after news reporting after interview, right? Like on Ellen DeGeneres, where Ellen DeGeneres says directly to the writer and to Marsha Clark, who was like, the lead prosecution, it was really accurate though. They really got it right. And she's like, yeah, it was very accurate. But that piece of information was 100% fabricated, as well as several others. So then it's like, no, you sensationalized the story, added in pieces of information that weren't 100% true, and then people who didn't actually watch the honest trial don't realize that what they're engaging with is a fabrication, fictionalized, and so then now they believe that they're informed, and then use that in order to form their opinions. And so I would say that it's not that people have gotten more access to more information, because the rawest information is going to be in that trial, but it's not appealing, it's not entertaining. And you're right, people have bad attention spans, and that trial lasted about a year. So yeah, people are going through all the hours and hours of footage of that trial in order to get the actual piece of information. I don't think that happened at all.
It's an interesting perspective. The first thing I'm going to respond to is, you're not going to find an argument with me that the media doesn't help anything ever under any circumstance. So you're not going to find an argument there. I'm not going to debate that. The second thing is the glove. I'm not even going to talk about the glove. And the reason I'm not going to is because I believe the reason OJ Simpson was found not guilty is because of prosecutorial misconduct, and dare I say, laziness and shitty things said out loud before, during, and after the trial. So okay. With that being said, I'm not even going to discuss the glove. I don't want to discuss any of that. What I want to do is I want to jump right into where I believe there's an indisputable point that there's evidence proving he did the murder. So
sure.
By the numbers, and I'm, forgive me because I'm reading my preparation, but 108 total exhibits. This includes blood droplets and other things, but all DNA. So 108 DNA exhibits. All 100 were cross-referenced and verified by 3 independent labs, and the results all came back on those 108 identical. meaning there wasn't an issue with the testing. They all got the same results of what the DNA strand is. With that said, I guess I'll pause for a second and ask you just a quick question. Do you accept that?
I don't accept that all 108 DNA exhibits were tested and that all of them came back conclusive, because to the contrary, the vast majority of DNA exhibits weren't actually being able to be tested because there was environmental degradation, and there was environmental. Go ahead.
But real quick, this is pre that. So this was before trial. If you're talking about police mishandling samples and such, those are included in this, the degradation of the DNA, and I will get to DNA degradation in a second. But again, I think the point I'm trying to make is that all 3 labs got the same result, meaning if a degraded DNA sample was tested, it was tested at 3 different labs and they all came back with the same DNA strand, the same result, same everything.
Oh, sure. Oh, sure. Okay. What you're speaking to is the fact that yes, that these things were cross-references and corroborated across 3 labs. But I'm not disputing that. But what I am saying is that the vast majority of blood that was found at the crime scene, right, at Bundy, wasn't able to be tested for DNA.
I'm going to give you a huge bone here. So give me 1 sec, because I hear you. Out of that 108, 105 of them fall into an argument that was made where they could have plausibly been degraded or whatever.
Not plausibly. So in order to test for the DNA, they do what is called an RFLP test. Are you familiar?
Have I done an RFLP?
No, of course not. I haven't either. I'm not in whatever. But do you know what an RFLP test is? Or at least it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I'll explain it really quickly.
One is meant for. Go ahead. Yeah, but go ahead.
Well, if you already know, well, it's probably better just to speak it just so that everyone who's listening would be able to understand.
Seem like an expert on this.
I'm not an expert, not at all. Okay, I have very cursory knowledge of like DNA testing. Okay,
from down here where my knowledge is, you seem like an expert.
Okay, well, we're both going to be trying our best. Okay, an RFLP test is the type of test. I think it stands for like refraction fragment length polymorphism test, right? And the purpose of that test is to take the DNA, right, and then take a little splice of it, basically like a small little sample, and then they take that against a controlled DNA, and then they compare the two, and using that they're able to come to the conclusion that these 2 DNAs match, and so then they can say this DNA came from the same person or whatever, it matches the sample, right? Well, in order for you to be able to do an RFLP test, the samples have to be in pretty good shape. But what they discovered was that the vast majority of blood samples that were there at the crime scene weren't able to be tested for RFLP, because there are 2 different types of first, of course, there is, like I said, degradation, right? And that's a separate test altogether, and that most of the blood samples that were there were too degraded to even be able to actually figure out if they belong to anyone, right? And so because of that, then they weren't able to be tested. Then some of the other samples, I mean, and then the other thing was,
I want to just quickly, I got.
Oh, you can stop. Yeah, go ahead and interrupt there. Go ahead. What's up?
No, it's just that I reject that. It's not that they weren't able to be tested. It's just everything that you're saying right now was disputed and brought up as an argument in court.
No.
They were tested. Everything was tested. We agreed that 108 samples were tested by 3 independent labs.
Right. No, hold on.
But that in that time frame, that the defense could have come up with an explanation for every single sample before they were tested.
They did. No, it's not before they were tested. Again, what I'm saying is that some of the samples that were found there could not be tested. An RFLP test,
included in the 108.
It is included in the samples, right? It is included in the samples, and that's my point. Is that, listen, there were a great number of blood samples that were found that they could not test because there wasn't a high enough DNA count, and then because some of them were too degraded, right? Of the blood samples that were found at the crime scene. Now, what ended up happening was 3 weeks later, 21 days later, they went back to the crime scene, and then at that point they found brand new blood samples, right? 21 days later, and those new blood samples had higher DNA tests, and then they were capable of being RFLP tested, and those ones were the ones that they used to positively identify them with OJ Simpson. So what you'll find frequently is that people will refer to all of the blood as a whole as if all blood was equally testable, all blood was equally identifiable, and that's not the case. What you'll find, as I'm stating very clearly, the vast majority of blood that was at Bundy was not testable and was not traceable to OJ Simpson because of degradation and low DNA count. The few blood samples, I don't know if I can use the word few, but the blood samples that were able to be tested with OJ and positively associated with OJ Simpson were discovered at a later date and had lower degradation despite being in the elements for 21 extra days, and also had higher DNA counts, right, which were inexplicable. And of course, then they had the presence of EDTA, but I don't want to get into EDTA right now. I'm just talking about the fact that the vast majority of blood samples that were discovered weren't there. When you read an article and it says there's a total of X amount of samples, and I don't believe it, I didn't think there was 108 individual blood samples. There was 100. There was
8 DNA samples, is what I said.
Yeah, well,
so even if and I'm just to throw you kind of a hint of the next step, but I'm still gonna talk about this. But the hint to the next step is, even if I were to agree with you, which I don't, you would explain away the blood samples, but not the hair samples. So within that 108.
Okay, so that's where we're running into an issue. Sure. Okay. Yeah. So if I thought you were talking about blood specifically, right, at this point.
I still don't believe that's where we're running into an issue. I would say that at the end of the day, I'm comfortable, just so we can move past this. I'm comfortable agreeing that just kind of a moral stance here. I'm a firm believer in what the justice system is supposed to be. The whole saying of, I would rather 100 guilty men walk free than one innocent man be locked up. So I'm a firm believer in that. And I'm also, again, you're not going to find an argument that there was a lot of everything from, we'll call it first day blunders, through misconduct, through malicious misconduct, through media manipulation. Agreed. All of that took place. You're not going to find an argument.
But those weren't the arguments I just made, though.
No, I agree. I understand. But what I'm saying is, just to move past all of that, out of the 108 samples, DNA samples, I'm comfortable saying that 105 of them I won't use in my argument.
Okay.
Even though I disagree with the defense's position, and I'll give some more citations here, but I disagree with the defense's position that, quote, 100% DNA degradation on 100% of the samples happened. I just think that's statistically.
No, but they didn't say that. The defense didn't say.
But they did. They said they're 100% degraded. When they couldn't explain 3 of them, they went to the police planted the DNA.
Specifically, sample number 117 was not degraded. Barry Scheck said that out of his own mouth. He said specifically 117 had no degradation. So they did not say 100% of the samples were degraded. If 117, the one that was discovered later on by Detective Fung, was specifically not degraded, right, according to Barry Scheck himself. So no, they didn't say 100% of the things were degraded. It was never a statement made by the defense.
Yeah, excellent argument for a boogeyman. So if you're talking about a sample, quote, 117, obviously that's not included in my argument of 108 total. So again, I'm not even arguing that maybe they did police misconduct and found evidence somewhere when they shouldn't be doing that through procedurally speaking.
I think you misunderstood me. I'm not saying it was sample number 117. I'm sorry, it was piece of evidence number 117. But it would have been. But hold on. But it would. No, I'm sorry, because when I'm saying piece of evidence number 117, that 117 thing isn't all of the blood evidence. Some of those things would just be shoe prints. So one of those pieces of evidence would be the glove. One of those pieces of evidence might be a weapon discovered. One of those pieces of evidence might be a hair fiber. I mean, I'm sorry, the fiber from the beanie. I'm not saying.
So isn't it fair to say that the only thing you would actually feasibly have a problem with, as far as going back to get evidence later, would be DNA?
No, that's not the only thing. Number one. Hold on, but no. Wait. You're moving past the argument that I'm making. You're interrupting as if you know where I'm going to go, and you don't. What I'm basically saying is, sample number 117 would absolutely be included in whatever blood samples you're talking about, right? In the 108 pieces of DNA evidence, sample number 117 would absolutely be included in that, and that sample had zero degradation, according to the defense. So it is an error to say that the defense tried to label all blood samples as too degraded and not having DNA. They specifically contrasted those. Wait, what can't?
I'm telling you that in my argument for proof that DNA exists to prove he did these murders, I'm telling you there's 108 pieces of evidence. You're telling me that you're going to use piece number 117?
No, I'm not. Wait, I feel like you're not listening. Let me try it one more time, please, because I don't want this conversation to get ugly, and I feel like I'm really trying to make it very clear, and you're not listening.
I'm attempting.
Okay, listen. Evidence, piece number 117 is included within the 108 DNA samples that you would be talking about, because 117 is not a reference to which sample it is. It's just a reference to which piece of evidence it is. Do you understand that?
So you're saying in the entire trial, evidence piece 1 through evidence piece 1 million, this was evidence piece 117?
Yes.
So the confusion with me comes in, it just so happens they're very close in numbers.
Right.
And you're also saying that there was found evidence later. So at this point, I would ask you to dive in a little bit more into what evidence piece number 117 was.
117.
Real quick, just to do a second part, and I'll give you the floor. But the second part of the question, you say, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, maybe I misunderstood, that this particular piece of DNA evidence, they went back to retrieve 30 days later. Where 21. Did you hear that? Where's the source for that? Of 21, I apologize.
Sure. So that was in the logs, right? Because the police have to literally identify and enumerate every single piece of evidence that they find, right? So when you go to a crime scene, it's like a standard procedure. You go, you find a piece of evidence, you immediately label it, right? Okay, so this is evidence piece number 1. We found a bloody footprint, if that's the first thing that you see. Then you continue on up the ladder. Okay, hey, we find a hole in a wall, right? Indicating that there might have been some sort of struggle. That would be piece of evidence number 2. And you just go up the list until you get to all of those all of those pieces of evidence, right? A tire mark, right? Like a screeching tire mark. Someone can say, it seems like they left in a hurry. And so then they would label that, right? And they would take a picture of that. And so there are photographs, and that's how you do a crime scene. And so what I'm saying is the very specific piece of evidence, number 117, was a specific blood droplet that was discovered on the back gate at Bundy by Detective Fung, and that piece, number 117, was one of the pieces that was positively identified and associated with OJ Simpson. However, previous blood samples, right, because they label all of their blood samples. I think there was one that was 44, was also a blood droplet, and that one was too degraded. It could not be associated with OJ Simpson, as neither could 56, neither could 53, etc., etc., etc. So there were plenty of blood droplets that were discovered that were not able to be traced to OJ Simpson because of environmental degradation and because they had too low DNA count. And so they could not perform an RFLP test. An RFLP test would be what would be specifically needed in order to be able to trace this DNA directly to OJ Simpson, right? Because otherwise you could say, hey, this could have been the victim's DNA. We have no idea, right? But that specific droplet was not associated with OJ Simpson. And because they couldn't do an RFLP test. However, the new ones discovered by Fung later, those ones were the ones that were able to be positively associated with OJ Simpson. And of course, that is cross-reference against 3 Lab, but it's reductive to just simply reference the fact that they were able to cross-reference those specific droplets, because we know that the previous droplets weren't able to be tested or associated with OJ Simpson.
I appreciate the explanation. I apologize for the confusion. I still reject. Let me make a concede first. I concede that maybe in my excited nature, I stuck with 100% figure.
You there?
You've given 2 at this point. I'll take your word for both of them, but I'll still say that leaves 90 whatever percent of the evidence. So now you've dismissed away X amount of DNA evidence. And again, just to move past this point, I'm comfortable saying that out of the 108, I'm going to argue 105 were explained away in some way, shape, or form. So that leaves 3. What were those 3?
Okay.
So how do you explain those three, that there was no argument of degradation, they were admissible in court, they did match OJ Simpson? Before you answer, I'm going to give what I believe, and then of course you go ahead. I'm sorry, but I believe that this all comes down to the doubt in DNA testing that was instilled. And before I shit on the defense, I would expect them to do this. This is an obvious argument for a defense lawyer to make, but they instilled doubt in the DNA testing. Whether that at the end of this, I'm actually going to make an argument. I don't believe any of this had anything to do with it, but I do believe DNA exists. So with that being said, what do you say to the three? I mean, there's no explanation for it other than the police planted it, and that's exactly what the defense tried to say.
Sure. Okay. So just to be clear, I don't believe that they instilled doubt in the DNA process. In fact, they got literally the foremost experts, the defense did, the foremost experts in DNA at the time. You have to understand.
Two of them ended up disagreeing on this right in the middle of the trial.
Well, actually, one of them, the ones who ended up disagreeing, originally agreed, and then during the break, actually went and spoke with the prosecution, and then came back and changed his testimony. This was actually asked in the trial while he was on the stand, and they asked him directly, "Did you speak to the prosecution while we were on break?" He said yes. Obviously, you know that it's against the law to talk about anything regarding the trial, and he volunteered that information. We didn't discuss the trial in any way.
I'm gonna have to just pause you there. That's not true. Not only is there procedural ways for prosecutions and all kinds of defendants to speak, but you can also meet with the judge privately. So
wait, no. Hold on.
Procedurally, you can do it, and also
no. I'm sorry. Please don't stop me to say something incorrect. You can try to correct the narrative with something that's not true when I'm done. But first off, it is the judge literally gives the statement to the people because it was during the middle. It was while a person was on the stand and they had to go to recess. And the judge specifically says, during these times, while you are on break, do not discuss the trial in any way. This is literally standard procedure in any courtroom. You are not, during a recess of a freaking trial, allowed to discuss anything regarding that trial during that break, right?
So who are you talking about right now? The judge is talking to the jury?
The judge is talking to all the people. He's talking to both the prosecution, he's talking to the defense. You are not allowed to discuss the trial with that person, with the witness while you were on recess. However, during that break, the witness did go and speak to the prosecution. Now, I cannot say, because I wasn't there, that they spoke specifically about the trial. What I can say is that when he came back, he then reneged on his original statements, because his original statement was that the blood was consistent with EDTA, and when he came back, he said, I want to correct the narrative and say, I am not sure that it's consistent with EDTA. So that's what happened. And so yes, I will grant you that guy, and I think his last name was it was Agent Marks. Agent Marks retracted his original argument that it was consistent with EDTA, even making the statement, if it's not EDTA, I don't know what it could be. He did that after going in recess and talking with the prosecution. I would argue that probably insinuates that they probably did coerce, or maybe not coerce. Something involving that conversation convinced him to change his story. Now, to answer the original question that you asked, what would dismiss those other three things, right? So first off, we understand that when they drew OJ Simpson's blood, that they took 8 cc's of blood from OJ Simpson. By the time, and I don't know if you stop me at any time you disagree with anything I'm going to say during this, okay?
Let me before you go there, let me just pause you. I truly believe at the end of the day, none of this really matters because of those three. So I'm curious to hear, how you explain those away. But with regards to those two people, and I just want to quickly take a
wait. I was answering your question.
I know, but because I'm going to give you the floor for as long as you want it.
No, but I don't need you to give me the floor as long as you want. You already, but you made your argument. You made your argument and asked a question, and now I'm trying to respond, and you're literally not letting me.
Oh boy, I don't. First of all, you did just give me the opportunity to interrupt anytime I disagree. So there's that.
But two, I haven't even made the statement for you to disagree with. Please don't be dishonest like this, man.
Before we go to the three.
Oh my gosh.
That's what I'm trying to do. Before we go to the three, I want to address what you just said about going to the prosecution. I don't believe you and I will ever find an opportunity to agree on this. So we're going to have to agree to disagree. Implications that something nefarious happened with no proof is a fallacy. So you saying that that is evidence, quote unquote, that OJ is innocent, or excuse me, I apologize.
I didn't even make that statement.
No, I didn't mean to misrepresent you. That there is no evidence to convict him. I believe that you using that as an argument is a fallacy. You can't. There's no nefarious plot that you've proven.
Okay.
So I don't think we'll ever agree on it. So I'm comfortable just moving forward and letting us talk about those three now. But that's why I wanted to pause here.
You didn't need to pause there, and I'm going to go ahead and ask you to go ahead and do something that I've done. So far, I've taken notes when you've been speaking because you've made sometimes more than one point, right? For example, one of the points you made earlier was justice for most of those jurors was letting OJ off the hook. It's still there. I'm waiting to be able to get to it because the conversation has moved forward. It's a living, breathing conversation. So I wrote it down so that I won't forget it, so I'll be able to address it at a later time. Another thing you said was
people wanted a conversation, not a structured debate with notes. Wasn't that something you asked for?
I'm having a conversation. However, as I'm
sure, your advice for me is going to be to take notes and wait until it's the appropriate time to bring it up.
That is going to be. Hold on. That is going to be my advice, and the reason why that's going to be my advice is because, like what happened earlier, and as I'm sure you know, conversations happen, and as they happen, plenty of times people are going to make more than one point. And sometimes you might want to really go down the rabbit hole of one of the points in order to really suss out the truth or the veracity of that specific argument. When doing so, that means other arguments that were made might just be sitting there waiting or never addressed. I don't want that to happen. And so I don't think that it deteriorates from a conversation or a debate in order for someone to take down notes so they can be sure that everything is addressed. Furthermore, I don't think it's very honest for you to sit there and try to say, I told you to interrupt you at any time. I told you to interrupt me if you disagreed, right, with the following statements, and then you interrupt me about something before. I think that was a rather dishonest thing to do. So now
that's a good faith opinion. And to quickly address that, no, I agree with you. I understood exactly what the context of interrupt me if you disagree. I completely understood.
But you misused it.
I didn't. To be completely fair, roll back the tape. You paused. I had my mic muted.
I was not paused. The tape will be there. The tape.
I
got you. No. It's okay.
Understand. So I took that opportunity.
You're right. The tape will be there, and you will see that I did not pause. I literally was continually talking. I'm 100% sure about that. Now, moving forward, of course, please do. Now, moving forward, the answer to the question that you asked was, what would have been the thing that would have dismissed those 3 blood droplets? And as I was going on to say that you interrupted me.
Just say it. Don't do it. Don't do that. Just say it. Come on.
Okay. I'm willing to move on. Just don't do that in the future.
Don't do that. Don't do that. Just move on. Just say it.
Don't do what you did, and we won't have to worry about this ever happening again. So now you're doing the thing. So you need a moderator. I see it now.
Oh, just say we're here to have a conversation.
I would think so, but then if we're here to have if we're here to have a conversation, then don't interrupt me when I'm talking. And I've been pretty good.
Move on.
Do you need a moderator? Should we have this at a later time with a new moderator? Because right now it feels like you're interrupting me every time I'm talking.
You're getting a little loud. I think I just need you to move on to the 3 points. We're good. That's it. Move on. I'm muting. I'm taking notes. Move on. Let's go. I'm ready.
Right now, you're interrupting me every time I'm talking. It seems like you might need a moderator. Do we need to get a moderator? Because it feels like if you can't actually let me speak and you can't control yourself, then you need a moderator. I don't. I have all kinds of conversations and debates with people all the time. If you can't control yourself, we probably need a moderator.
Okay, you're right. I'm wrong. Go ahead.
So the point that so the question that you asked was, what would be the reason why I would go ahead and what would I use to dismiss the blood samples originally? I'm sorry, the 3, right? Like it was a hypothetical because I don't know the exact number of ones that were able to be tested, right? But if the remaining,
it's reported that 3, just to clarify, I'm sorry to interrupt. I do acknowledge I did that just now, but it's reported that the 3 were not able to be dismissed by the defense in court, and instead their defense against these 3 was the evidence was planted. That was their defense on these 3.
Okay, so those 3, I'm assuming, are the ones that were discovered. I feel pretty confident were the ones that were discovered by Detective Fung 21 days after the murder took place, and those 3 blood samples were the ones that had significantly higher DNA count had literally no degradation despite being exposed to the element for longer than the previous ones that weren't able to be tested, and those 3 also had the presence of EDTA. Now, the reason why
you did tell me to interrupt at this portion if I disagree. Just to clarify your position, you're saying let's go with 117 blood droplet on the fence. You're saying that blood sample had degradation and couldn't be tested, correct?
You said you disagreed. You said you would interrupt me if you disagreed. What did I say that you disagreed with specifically?
I'm making sure I understand your position before I put words in your mouth. Is that what you're saying? That blood sample 117 couldn't be admitted because of degradation because it was found 21 days later, whatever it may be?
No, I'm saying the exact opposite. I'm sorry.
That's why
this is crazy. Yeah, I don't know.
It's nuts.
Yeah, it is. So 117, as I said earlier, and I'll say again, 117 absolutely was able to be tested because 117 specifically had no degradation and also had a significantly higher over 100 times DNA count. So because 117 was less degraded, it was actually capable of having an RFLP test done on it, and that's what they were able to use to positively associate that specific sample with OJ Simpson. And so that was the argument that I made earlier.
So what's your argument against that sample?
Right, and I've been trying to get to it, and every single time you've interrupted now.
But it's talking about 117 now again.
I've had been talking about 117.
I'm talking about the 3. We don't have a correlation with this.
One of the 3 is 117.
You just said, roll back the tape, everyone. You just said you're assuming the 3 that I'm talking about are the ones you're talking about. You just said that.
Man, this is crazy.
Yeah. So with 117, you're saying it was acceptable, it was tested. What did the results come back? Was it OJ's DNA?
Yes.
Okay, so why are you arguing it can't be admitted in court?
I didn't say that it couldn't be admitted in court. What are you even saying? I never said anything like that. What?
So does that prove that he left blood on the fence?
No, you've asked me. My God, you tried to ask me now for like multiple times, and literally the framing for this whole section of the conversation was you asking me why would I disagree with those blood samples as good evidence for OJ Simpson, and every time I've gone to answer it, now you've interrupted. This is crazy.
You tell me to interrupt if I disagree at any time during this portion. No.
Okay. Yeah, bro, I think you might need a moderator. I don't think you know how to have a conversation. This is crazy.
Well, I did offer you a moderator, didn't I? And you denied.
I did not deny. I asked.
Yeah, you said you didn't need one, and I agreed we could have a conversation. But what you're doing is you're not having a conversation. You're just ad hominem all over the place. It's pretty telling of how you make an argument. I'm asking you questions to understand your position so I can rebuttal it. You getting mad about me asking you about your position it's incredibly childish. You don't disagree, or you do disagree? Can I move on with my questioning? Are we cool with that? Do you want to take it to another date with a moderator? What do you want to do?
So this whole time you're saying you want to move on with your questioning, but the entire time I've never gotten a single chance to actually address the question that you asked.
Because every time I ask a question, you sigh and complain about me asking questions. Just answer. Let's have a conversation.
Hey, listen, I'm being as serious as I can right now.
Yeah.
This is being recorded, as you know. You're gonna look back at this, and it's gonna be really embarrassing. But I'm gonna move forward. Okay, no, I got you. But heard what I'm gonna do.
No, you don't.
No, yes, I do. Yes, I do. Because what I'm going to say is, I'm going to move forward. Okay, sure, you can say I don't, but I did. Now, what I'm going to say is,
go ahead.
I'm gonna go ahead and move forward, and now I'm gonna rescind this. I'm gonna change that. Okay. I normally make the argument that if you disagree when I'm making a point, that you can go ahead and interrupt. But I see now that will be licensed for you to derail every single point that I'm trying to make. So now at this point,
I agree.
I'm gonna go ahead and ask you not to interrupt me, and I'm gonna do my best not to interrupt you, and we're just gonna go ahead and try our best to be reasonable and make our points and like actually address each other back and forth, because it doesn't seem like you're able to handle that. So with that being,
can I make a quick statement before you start though? That sounds
sure.
Like
go ahead. Go ahead.
A conversation is a back and forth, right? If I don't understand you, I'm gonna ask for clarity. What you're asking for is a debate, and I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to flip my microphone up. I'm happy to grab a pad and write it all down, and we can do it that way. But that's not how this was framed in the beginning. But let's switch gears. Let's do that. You're up.
Okay. Whatever. So when it comes to those 3 blood samples, right, the ones that were actually able to be associated with OJ Simpson, I do believe that there is good evidence that those blood samples were planted. The evidence, just really quick, Desperado, I need you to edit out all that nonsense. We're just going to try to keep the conversation going quick, okay? So the evidence that I would say that those 3 blood samples are planted is the fact that when they drew OJ Simpson's blood, they took 8 cc's of blood from him. And this was testified by the person who drew his blood, and he says he measured it. Then during cross-examination, they asked him, because he said approximately 8 cc's. And so they said, you said approximate. So how much are you not sure? And he said it could be 7.9 to 8.1, right? It could have been 7.9 cc's or 8.1 cc's, which gives sort of a range of approximation. He could have also said, hey, it could have been 4 or it could have been or 12, right? And that would show you the range of approximation. But he said 7.9 or 8.1, meaning it was very, very close to 8, okay? So when that blood, as soon as it was drawn, was taken to the crime scene for multiple hours. When it arrived at toxicology, as soon as they got it, which this was 3 hours after the blood was drawn and after it's been to the crime scene, toxicology immediately measures the amount of blood that they're receiving. This is what they're supposed to do. The way they do this is they fill up another vial with water and hold it side by side to make sure that it's the same amount, and then measure that much and say this is how much blood was in there. When toxicology does their appropriate measurement to figure out how much blood they have, they only had 5.5 cc's. So 1.5 cc's of blood was missing. So I would say, I don't know where that blood went, but it obviously disappeared. When you combine that with the fact that blood samples that were discovered 21 days after the murder had no degradation, way higher DNA count, and the presence of EDTA, and they were discovered by Detective Fung 21 days later in a revisit to the crime scene, I would say that begins to be very, very suspicious. But what makes it more suspicious is the fact that there were photographs taken of that very spot in the crime scene, and when they asked Detective Fung, could he identify the new droplets that he discovered, number 117, could he identify that in the photograph? His response was, because it wasn't there, it doesn't appear to be inside of the photo. So since it didn't appear to be, oh yes, I'm sorry, that would be, someone just made a statement. It would be 2.5 cc's less, right? Instead of the 8, it was at 5.5. 1 cc needed to be, 1 cc was already taken, I forget what the purpose was, but 1 cc of it was gone for a specific type of test that they were doing, and so then that cc was accounted for, and then the remaining 1.5 could not be accounted for. And so the fact that you find blood at a crime scene that much later sounds very suspicious to me, especially when it has no environmental degradation and a higher DNA count and the presence of EDTA. And you would obviously know that the environment, literally sunlight, can degrade DNA evidence, right? And it was left out on that same gate for 21 days and didn't degrade, whereas all of the other blood samples did. That's why I would say that it was obviously planted.
So I'm gonna revert back to a point that I made earlier, that I just think there's a lot of factors outside of evidence that do play into how someone could make an argument against guilt or not guilt. But going specifically with what you just said, and I fear I'm opening a can of worms here by asking a question so I can continue to make my point, but I'm going to ask you a question. How many blood samples or DNA samples or any piece of evidence were found, quote, 21 days later, or later? Let's just say later. I'll give you later.
I don't know. I don't know the exact number.
Okay, so that rolls into my next point of, so yeah, I mean, even if I believed everything you just said, which I don't, we're going to get into that in a second, but even if I did, you've just explained one. What about the other two? So I guess when I'm done here, feel free to answer about the other two. But again, going into, do I think there was enough shit going on within the world to convince a jury or to get a jury or to nullify a jury. Do I think there was enough going on for that to happen? Absolutely. But that's not what we're debating right now. What we're debating is, you think that there's no DNA evidence to convict OJ Simpson. And you said it yourself. You would assume, you started out by saying one can only assume if there's missing blood, it was planted. And then you ended your statement by saying it was obviously planted. So I would interject and say, prevent a connection or present a connection. Tell me about a specific person with a motive, with an opportunity. Give me some sort of connection that shows that was planted. And I believe if you were able to do that, you could tie the rest of your together and just ignore the other two and just say, no, the argument was correct. Those all three were planted in the same way. But you haven't been able to connect it. You started by saying it would make sense. I assume there's missing blood. It's unaccounted for. And then you end with, it was obviously planted. No, it's obviously missing, but not obviously planted. So it could have been lost. I mean, some rhetorical questions. Have you ever drawn blood? Have you ever transported blood? So again, things to think about. It's not obvious. So I would reject that term. But again, I'll give you the ball back. What about the other two? And of course, you want to respond to anything else.
Okay, so just to be clear, I never said that there was no DNA evidence to convict OJ. What I'm saying is that the DNA evidence that was there, that was to convict OJ, was planted. And furthermore, what I would also say is, okay, it's an argumentative style, right? So you start by pointing out an assumption, and then you provide the evidence that shows you how that original hypothesis becomes a fact, right? So what I was doing, starting with the assumption that blood was missing, right? Then what I give are the details that demonstrate that the blood was planted. Now, the evidence, right, that shows that the blood was planted is the fact that we have a photograph of a gate, and blood, that sample, number 117, was directly next to another blood sample, right, when it was finally discovered by Detective Fung. When we have the original photograph of the original blood sample that 117 was directly next to, 117 can't be seen in that photo. So to say it very plainly, imagine I take a picture of a blood sample of a marking on a gate, and directly, 3 inches to the right, it's still completely bare. There is no other marking. If later on I come back and I discover a new marking, right, and I can show you a photograph, because I have to take a picture of them as we do in crime scenes, and then you compare both pictures side by side and you say, wait a minute, in the original picture, this marking wasn't there. Look for yourself. And you say, you're right, it doesn't appear to be in the photograph. That would mean that the marking had to have been added at a later date, right? And so because of the fact that this marking wasn't there in the original photo, but was instead discovered 21 days later, that would be a piece of evidence that makes it appear to be planted. That piece of evidence would also be corroborated by the fact that obviously we know DNA degrades being left in the elements. However, this new sample that wasn't in the original photo, this new sample discovered many days after the old sample, that sample does not have degradation. No degradation. So I don't understand how a new sample left in very close to the original sample for 21 days has no degradation. Furthermore, it also has a significantly higher DNA count, right? I'm saying literally 100 times more DNA than some of the other samples that had been there on the crime scene. So I would say those two pieces of evidence are what make me believe it was planted. And finally, the presence of EDTA. EDTA being in those samples, as was originally argued by Detective Marks, indicate that blood, especially in the amount that it was, would be something that came from a tube. And so that's why I would say that it seems obvious that it's planted.
Before I go, can I ask you just one more question?
Sure.
Do you believe that what you just said also explains the other two?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm sorry I left out that part. The thing that I'm talking about refers to all three of those new pieces of blood evidence that were discovered by Detective Fung.
Okay. First, I want to say, just for the sake of saying it, no. I promise you, it's not tactical by any means. I was under the impression that that was the debate. Now, I'm not confident doing our whole routine where I say, go back and watch the clip. I'm really not confident about that. That's what I said specifically when we agreed. But I was under the impression you felt that there wasn't sufficient DNA evidence to convict OJ Simpson. That's what I was under the impression your position was. So just to kind of adjust my my equator, you're saying that anything that was presented isn't good, and you have evidence for that. So fair enough. I want to say it wasn't nefarious. It's just, I misunderstood. Or
just really quickly,
or I will go back and watch the tape, and I'm completely right, and I'm taking an L here for no reason.
Really quickly, I don't think that you were being nefarious, but I do understand where the miscommunication happened. What I said was verbatim, because I say this all the time. There is no good evidence to convict OJ Simpson, and the good there is speaking to the veracity of the evidence. That's what was happening.
Yeah, fair enough. Whatever. It is what it is. I love moving on. So the first thing I'll respond, because you seem to be super stuck on this photo. And I know you didn't mention it in the last response you gave, but you said it earlier, so I want to address it as well. My argument to that is kind of an Occam's razor situation. In the 1990s, they had 35 millimeter film. So when they're taking pictures of crime scenes with old antiquated devices, we're coming from a place today where we have phones that are 7,000 times better on our cell phones. So I just think it's an Occam's razor. It's more than likely that the photo quality was terrible, therefore it couldn't be seen. And I would further that by saying, you mentioned earlier that the detective took the stand, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I don't mean to misquote. If I do, stop me. But you said he said on the stand, no, it does not appear to be there. So if that's what you said, I think those words were chosen very carefully. I do think this is a case of high-priced lawyers doing an incredible job and taking something like this and be like, well, look, we can't actually see it. You can't distinguish it against the paint finishing on the fence. And this is a great piece. And then the detective looks at it and goes, yeah, they kind of got us there. So no, you got me. It does not appear to be on the fence. So I believe it to be one of those situations. With that being said, I'll claim a little bit of ignorance here. Do you have access to that photo? Is that something that you have access to?
Sure. I mean, I don't have it on me, but yeah, it was something that was shown at the trial.
Yeah, I mean, I did, while you were talking, I did a couple of searches, and I've been doing it throughout, haven't been able to find the photo. So just for post-debate pleasure, if you wouldn't mind, if you could send that over. And anyone who listens to this post-debate, I'd love to take a look and kind of use that to confirm the thesis I just threw out about photo quality. To quickly hit home on the photo quality is a point here I forgot to make. I'm an avid trial watcher, and one that really sticks out to me is the Kyle Rittenhouse case. Even in the situation that we're in now with technology and digital cameras, and it's everywhere, and it's high quality, and everything's in 4K, they still had an argument about pixels. They were zooming in, and in one side was arguing one thing. So can you see, is that Kyle? Is that actually him? Is that really a gun? And it came down to pixelation and sending things through text messages and how it compresses the file. So even today, photo quality arguments are made by defense and prosecution. Super common. Last point I want to make is, and again, just if I'm wrong, we can roll it back and we can verify that. But I'm under the impression that we don't know that 117 is one of the three. We're operating under the assumption that it is, but I don't believe we've ever agreed that it is. And if you want to take the position that it is one of those three, then I would ask you to, at this point, just put a link somewhere and let me take a look. Because if we're operating under the assumption that it is, your argument is completely valid. I do believe that there's room to believe that it was planted. If it's one of those three, I see where you're coming from. I still think you're wrong, and I still have more points to make. But correct me if I'm wrong. We're operating under the assumption that it is, not that it indisputably is. Correct?
Well, right. I would say that we are operating under the assumption that it is, but I feel like with good reason, and the reasons being that, like, again, most of the blood samples there wasn't able to be able to get the RFLP test. So because of that, that's why there needed to be new blood discovered. Furthermore, I want to point out, by the way, this isn't a matter of just simply photography. because again, this new blood was discovered 21 days later, right? Meaning that even if it wasn't photographed, it wasn't even identified, right? That because if it was identified originally, it would already have been marked, right? You don't go and mark old samples that were already, that we were already identified. This is
May I pause you for 1 second?
I would rather you didn't, if I can finish, because I feel like I just need to explain it fully. Thank you. So when you go to the crime scene, right, and this is why there's such a great disparity between these blood samples, right? 117 was discovered next to something as low as like 56, right? Meaning that now they've discovered all of these different pieces of evidence at different places, right? Not all of the things are going to be at that one specific location, right? They found something inside of OJ Simpson's house, on the Bronco, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So with all that being said, they discover 117 with their eyeballs much later. So then I would have to ask the question, if it had been there originally and it was so close in proximity to the other blood samples that they discovered, and Detective Fung is saying that it is right there in the new photograph and we can see them both side by side, right? And you're literally fine-tooth going over all of these little specks inside of this gate, because there were several discolorations all over that freaking gate, because some of it could have been rust, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're identifying all of these discolorations, but some sort of way you did not see the speck with your own eyeballs such that it was unidentified and remained so for 20 days after the murder took place, then that makes me question, if you couldn't have seen it the first day, why did you see it the second day? And of course, again, thinking of that in conjunction, right, with the idea that there was higher DNA count and the fact that that it didn't have the degradation and the presence of EDTA and the missing blood, I would say all of those things work together concomitantly to pretty much indicate that this blood had to have been planted. So the photograph isn't the problem. The problem is that you didn't even see it with your eyeballs, Detective Fung.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a great argument. But again, I think it's for a boogeyman. First, I would completely reject just kind of the notion first that you can, undeniably prove this evidence was planted with what you've presented. It's all circumstantial. The second thing I'll say is, I also absolutely reject the premise that any of this is real. And I'll say to you, and I don't mean to say this in a mean or aggressive way, I would say I would change my position when you show me where you heard this or saw this or read this. I want to see the fence. I want to see everything that you're talking about, because at piece value, right, at each individual fact that you say, it seems plausible, seems possible, still doesn't refute my point, I believe. But okay, when I put everything together, at this point, I'm going to need to see that. So I would ask and say the only thing that would take away my rejection of that entire argument would be me seeing where you heard that. 21 hours, the fence, the pictures, etc. With that being said, just for the sake of moving forward, even if that were the case, right, even if everything you're saying is the case, I would argue that this fence evidence is not in the three. And here's why. Out of the 108 DNA pieces that were presented, 105 were, again, argued away. And I didn't say it was because of degradation, but degradation was a piece of some of them leaving. Everything included in how the defense put up arguments for every piece of evidence that was presented, 105 were dismissed. I reject that the defense, the high-paid, celebrity defense team that he had, didn't think about that one piece of fence evidence slipped through, that they didn't stand up and say, hey, we have evidence that this was collected 21 days later and has no DNA degradation. They would absolutely argue that, and that would absolutely, if what you're saying is true, then that would absolutely be dismissed. So again, I reject that this particular piece of evidence is one of the three argued. And again, I want to just, and I don't mean to move the conversation forward without your permission. If you want to go back to it, we can, obviously, but to kind of move it a little bit more forward, I think just the timeline of the trial kind of shows this. So once those three were just couldn't explain them away, we go to police planting it. Once we realize it's police planting isn't working, everyone disintegrates and in comes Alan Dershowitz. So I just think the timeline of the trial also shows, and again, I'm not trying to stab anyone for this. I'm not trying to say the defense did wrong for doing this. I'm saying they did their job. They did what they were paid to do. They did their best job. But that's what they do. They can't explain it, so it was planted. If we can even remotely make the jury think this is true. So again, just to make it more evidence-based, I think that point makes the fence evidence not one of the three, because I believe that defense team would have figured that out based on all this evidence you're saying is available. 21 days later, it would have been in the discovery. So they absolutely would have called that out, and it would have been wrapped into the 105 that was dismissed.
Okay, just to be clear, I'm not one of those, I'm not some sort of genius person who went personally to the crime scene and like investigated all this information to come up with these pieces of information. What I'm quoting, the way I got this information, was from the testimony of one of the defense attorneys, Barry Scheck. Barry Scheck was literally, he said out of his own mouth that this didn't have any degradation. It was discovered 21 whatever later, the presence of EDTA. He's the one who stated all of these things. So the defense very much did say exactly what I'm saying. That's who I got it from. Where else, do you think I'm just some person who's just sitting home, some sort of way studied all this and came up with an argument on my own, when this is literally one of the most well-fought cases in existence, right? That exonerated a black man in a situation where he was being accused of murdering a white woman? Why would I be the one to come up with this argument? Of course Barry Scheck made these statements. So yes, hold on. No. It doesn't make my argument. What it does is refute it. What it does is it refutes your rejection, because you said, please don't interrupt. You said you rejected what I was saying and that you didn't believe that what I was saying was one of those pieces of the 108 specifically for that reason, because the defense would have said this. However, the defense, if they're intelligent, would know that they need to deal with these different samples differently, because for the first samples were obviously not able to even be tested with OJ Simpson. We don't have to sit there and argue about those. I don't have to sit there and say, well, this piece isn't OJ Simpson. Like, the prosecution isn't even making a statement. Evidence piece number 46 or 53 or whatever, that is OJ Simpson, because they couldn't make that statement because they weren't able to RFLP test it to say that. I don't have to dismiss it that way. Now, when you find 3 at a later date, I'm going to obviously compartmentalize those 3 because hold on. I am going to obviously compartmentalize those 3 because if these 3 found at a later date are positively associated with OJ Simpson, then I have to address that differently than I would the previous ones, which weren't able to be even tied directly to OJ Simpson. So that's why they said those 2 things. Furthermore, I think it's obviously true that yes, it is circumstantial evidence that I'm pointing out that indicates that this blood was planted, but I don't think that that's a really solid argument. Just simply saying, well, you don't have direct incontrovertible evidence that shows the person planting the blood. Of course I don't. But what I do have is 1.5 cc's of literally unaccounted for blood. I do have higher degradation despite being in the elements for 21 days. I do have less degradation despite being in the elements for 21 days. I do have 100 times the DNA count of the previous ones, such that this new sample was able to be part of an RFLP test. I do have the fact that this blood was discovered on that gate 21 days later, despite the fact that there was a cleanup of the crime scene 14 days after the murder took place, right? So 14 days after the crime scene, after it, they washed the blood down. 14 days they washed some of the blood down, they washed the crime scene, and despite that 14 days later and them washing the thing, they come back 7 days after the washing on the 14th, right? And then they discover these new blood samples. So I would say the fact that these blood samples were found despite the fact that the crime scene had been washed, the fact that they didn't see the blood samples on the very first time when they did it, which is why there's such a great disparity between other blood samples that is directly next to, the fact that it had the presence of EDTA, the fact that there was missing blood, all of those things together concomitantly seem like it paints a pretty clear picture to most sane people that this was obviously planted. That's why I said, whereas you start out with a hypothesis and an assumption, but you arrive at a pretty rational, well-founded conclusion that it must have been, or else you would have to explain those other details.
It's crazy that you ended with that, because that's exactly what I was going to say you just did. So my position at the beginning of this entire thing had nothing to do with the defense not addressing these pieces. They obviously did address these pieces because they were dismissed as evidence. 105 of them were litigated away, whether it be in the jury's mind or legally through the judge. 105 of them disappeared. So whatever quote you gave, yes, of course it took place during the trial, whether it be during day 1, day 5, day 10, doesn't matter. It happened. Of course, that's how these things take place. So for you to say again, and again, it's so ironic you ended with that, because that's what you just did. You're misrepresenting what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, you think you're smarter than the defense team. You think that the defense team forgot to litigate the fence piece, and it slipped through as one of these three that they couldn't explain away. You're right. Everything you just said paints a clear picture for that. We're just gonna, bite onto that fence evidence. Everything you just said paints a clear picture, whether it be in 1995 or today, that piece of evidence should not be used, or at the very least should be given some kind of disclaimer when presented to the jury. So I reject that they didn't think about that piece. Of course, that guy quoted that your quote. I'm not refuting the quote is true. I'm saying it had nothing to do with what I'm saying. They litigated it. That happened. And again, if he's saying that happened, then it should absolutely be dismissed. But I go back to those three pieces. This proves that fence piece is not in the three. Or I say proves, but it doesn't. That's my position, is it proves that it's not in those three. With that being said, one, I would reject that you made I would submit maybe an emotional statement, but you said all three were found 21 hours later. Do you have a source for that?
One, I didn't say 21 hours later. I said 21 days later, right?
Days, I apologize. Yeah.
And so, first off, I could find out where those statements are made, what day they discovered evidence piece 117. I guess I can try to look for that. First off,
you said all three.
Well, again, I think the three. I'm grouping the three because the three that were discovered that were tested for the DNA. Those three, which are obviously distinguished from the other ones, those ones were discovered later by Detective Fung. Furthermore, what I want to point out is, again,
I wasn't finished, so I have the right.
You asked me a question.
Yeah, it's for me to continue making my point, but I just want to.
No, you can't ask me a question and then interrupt in the middle of me answering your question.
Listen, I'm not interrupting. I'm going to let you keep going. I just want to establish a baseline here. The baseline for your position is you're saying all three that I'm saying couldn't be proven away were all found 21 days later based on what we're talking about with defense. That's what your position is.
Sure. Let me say it this way. Let me make sure I'm saying it this way, just to be crystal clear. Any blood sample that had the DNA that was able to be tested, those blood samples were discovered at a later date and had EDTA in them, as was argued by the defense, right? Okay. And just to be clear, you said that there should have been some sort of disclaimer placed on the evidence. That's not how courtrooms work.
Don't do it. Don't do it now.
That's not that you. I'm sorry. It is what you said. And if you disagree, you can wait till I'm done talking, and then you can go ahead and argue and reclaim it like I've done in the past.
You're right.
So that's simply not how courtrooms work. What would happen is that the prosecution would present the evidence, and then at which point then the defense now has the right to then present their argument against said evidence. I, as a defense attorney, can't go and say, can you make the prosecution present this disclaimer with their evidence? I can't do that. That's not how a courtroom works. What I can do is, if you say these are going to be your pieces of evidence, I can always say, I disagree with those pieces of evidence, and so then I'm going to wait until you present your pieces of evidence, and I'm going to use them against you and show the jury why this evidence isn't why I don't think this is good evidence. There's no way I can appeal to a judge, just to make sure everyone's clear here. There's no way I could ever go to a judge and say, Your Honor, I don't want this DNA evidence being presented to the jury because it has the presence of EDTA and because it was discovered at a later date and I think it was planted. The judge would never uphold that. The judge would tell you to make your case to the jury then, if that's what you're whatever, and prove that case to them. The judge's job is not to examine or try to determine the veracity of different arguments regarding pieces of evidence. That's the jury's job, right? The judge's job is to uphold the Constitution and to uphold procedure. So there's never a place, there's never a time period where a defense can go to the judge and say, hey, Your Honor, this isn't good evidence, and so I want you to throw it out for those reasons, because I think it was planted, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can't do that.
Yeah, so you certainly can. I agree with most of what you said, but the word you left out, I believe strategically, was the judge will determine the validity of the evidence being presented. And if during trial or during any proceedings, evidence that has already been given to the jury, meaning the jury now knows that there's 100 pieces of DNA evidence on the scene. And then later we find out, Your Honor, 3 of these were found 21 days later. The judge can absolutely say, due to whatever constitutional infringement happened with the argument, the judge can say anything from completely disregard everything you heard from that person. They can say disregard a number you heard. They can say understand that this person is not an expert. So they can add a disclaimer to the evidence. So the judge absolutely has authority over the validity of the evidence. And that's what I would be arguing, is if everything you're saying is true, this is absolutely proof that it should not be admissible. And again, if your argument, and you've made it crystal clear for me, is that all 3 of these pieces of evidence were found, just to make sure I'm saying the right time, 21 days later, like that's your argument, that they should all be not looked at as true because of that, and therefore they're planted. Again, I reject that's true. I reject that his high-priced lawyer, the whole team of them, did not think about that when they were discussing pieces of evidence that could be admissible in court. In fact, when that began, those pieces that they found, quote, 21 days later, wouldn't have even been in the original discovery or evidence find. So the lawyers would say, what do you mean you just found X amount of pieces? So of course they would litigate that these shouldn't be allowed. And out of those 105, just to be clear, not everything was thrown out. Some was admitted. But again, it was admitted maybe with a disclaimer. It was admitted under the pretense they understand that that expert may not know the best. There's so many things, and it doesn't come from the judge. You're right. Sometimes it comes from the prosecution making their argument because the judge doesn't feel like what they're arguing is an infringement of the Constitution. But for you to blanket say a judge can't find a piece of evidence invalid is just false. And what you've presented is, quote, invalid evidence. That's just invalid. I mean, that's departmental misconduct at the very least. They should have recessed and discussed it. So again, I reject that the 3 that were argued were a part of that bucket of any piece of evidence that could have been dismissed based on what you're saying. With that said, I'm glad you brought up the jury. So if you're saying the jury decides, I would just, along with everything else I'm sure you want to rebuttal, I would ask, there was a recent interview with one of the jurors who said, quote, 90% of us knew he did it. We didn't care. So, that was a juror sitting on a panel being questioned by media with 2 other jurors that sat on the case. So we have 3 jurors now all agreeing that 90% of that jury room knew he did it, but didn't care, wanted to null there. They wanted to go nullification. So I guess how would you respond to that?
Well, I would respond with contradictory statements from the vast majority of jurors on that trial. For example, there have been multiple documentaries, one which actually came out, I want to say, early this year, in which the jurors all got together and explained why they themselves found OJ Simpson to be innocent, why they found him not guilty, and they very much clearly stated that they very much disagreed with the statement from that one juror who said that they all knew that OJ Simpson was guilty. And no, at the time it was one. I don't believe that it's 3 to this day, actually.
I can put a screenshot of the interview.
Go ahead. Please do so. Please do so without interrupting.
Okay.
So, man, I don't know why you can't control yourself. Please stop doing that. Now, with that being said, I got you. I know. It's a good point. Stop interrupting. Yeah. Thank you. Stop. Now, if you want to have a debate, we can get a moderator. Wait, bro. No. You're not going to keep interrupting me. We've been past this. You said that you would. You said you would stop. So stop. Are you not capable of stopping?
Go ahead. Don't get so excited. Just go ahead.
Then will you stop?
Go ahead. I
think this will be my closing statement. Just to be clear, because I just don't think that you're capable. Man, it's so crazy how incapable most people are at debating. The point that I'm making is that now we have testimony from the jurors. We already agreed. I'm just gonna, bro. You're so don't worry about it. You literally said that we were going to move forward and that you were going to get the notepad and that we would actually change the conversation style. Yeah, you said you would meet me there. Stop interrupting me then. You said you would meet me there and that you understood and that you would stop interrupting me moving forward. And I did the same for you. right? Outside of like maybe one or two times where you've done it with permission, and I've done it once with permission, but now you won't stop. You're literally incapable. You know, you're not. Okay, sure. You can claim I'm lying. It's okay. It's on tape. What I'm doing is here. I sent it to you. No. I'm gonna finish talking. I sent it to you. There's the evidence. This is an exhibit from the jury themselves in which it says, and I'm just going to share it with my stream as well, that says no documentation of the photos from June 13th, because that was the original date where they first were collecting all that information. Then these new ones were discovered July 3rd, right? Then they also mentioned that they had a much higher DNA concentration. Then they also mentioned that there was no degradation and that there was EDTA. So just to be crystal clear, I'm not making my argument. I'm just reiterating what the defense themselves said in their own exhibit. So I'm not making that up. They said it. So it's very obvious. Lastly, what I would make the statement is that the jurors themselves out of their own mouths said that no one, that they all expected, that they genuinely believed. I'll just make the statements of one of the jurors. He said, I went into that jury expecting that I would be the only person that said he was innocent, and that the others would say that he's guilty, right? And then they did a preliminary, before they started discussing, they just did a preliminary vote amongst themselves, and that 10 of the 12 juries, before they had any discussion, right, before they started deliberating, that 10 of the 12 had already said that he was not guilty. And so then once they read that, they said, okay, so here we are. Let's go ahead and discuss the case from there. So the testimony of the vast majority of the jurors and that were there all stated that they voted because they didn't believe that the defense made a good enough case. It had nothing to do with Rodney King. It had nothing to do with any other misguided senses of justice. Out of their own testimony from their very own mouths, the prosecution didn't make a solid enough case.